Today, we're diving into a really personal story. It's about how a young Muslim girl's search for answers, for simple dignity, led her to leave her faith entirely. This is the story of a woman named Riham, and it all starts with her childhood in Morocco, a childhood that was just full of questions, a sense of injustice, and this deep, deep desire for freedom.
Let's start with this quote from Riham, because it is absolutely key to understanding her entire experience. Just try to imagine that idea as the wallpaper of your childhood. This constant, nagging reminder that before you're anything else, your gender is what defines your world.
So Riham's story really kicks off with something she noticed as a kid growing up in Morocco. The world seemed to run on two totally different sets of rules. You had one set for boys and a completely different one for girls.
In her world, the public space itself was basically divided by gender. For boys, the street was their playground, their social club. Society was just more forgiving of them. But for girls like Rihame, the street was just a path. It was only for getting from point A to B, and that's it. And there was this huge unwritten rule. You had to be home before dark, because the night, well, that didn't belong to you.
And you know, this wasn't just about being outdoors. This segregation was woven into the very fabric of everyday life. You'd go to a wedding, and men and women would be celebrating in separate areas. At family dinners, the men always got their food first. Even the laws themselves back this up, from inheritance, where a woman's share is smaller, to this fundamental idea that a woman never really belongs to herself. She's passed from her father's ownership to her husband's.
And the impact of all this? It was profound. Riham didn't just feel this way herself. She heard it from other women all the time. I would have liked to be a man. Now, this wasn't about gender identity. It was this heartbreakingly practical wish for the simple freedoms and the agency that just came with being born male in that society.
This feeling of unfairness, it didn't just stay at home. It followed her right into her school years. For a curious kid, school should be the place you go for answers. But for Riham, it became the place where her questions about religion were basically treated as dangerous or even sinful.
So as a young kid in her Islamic education class, she asked a really simple, logical question, the kind any child would ask. You know, if God is everywhere, how can he be in this room and the room right next door at the exact same time? She was just trying to apply the logic she was learning in one class to the theology she was being taught in another.
But her teacher's response wasn't an explanation. It was a threat. A flat-out threat. In this moment, this attempt to shut down her thinking with fear, it was absolutely pivotal. The message was crystal clear. Faith means you stop asking questions.
You'd think that would work, right? But it had the exact opposite effect. Instead of creating a more faithful believer, that teacher's threat created a suspicious one. It planted this tiny seed of doubt in her mind that maybe, just maybe, this belief system was too fragile to handle the simple questions of a child.
Okay, so as Riham moves into her teenage years, these sort of abstract doubts start crashing into very real, very personal experiences. The rules weren't just confusing anymore, they felt like a direct attack on her autonomy, on her dignity.
Her journey away from faith really sped up through a few key events. First, puberty. Suddenly, her body wasn't just hers. It became this issue for the whole family, a symbol of honor that had to be protected and controlled. Then at school, a new uniform policy was brought in, but only for the girls to hide their forms. She openly defied it. And then came this incredible discovery, her grandfather's hidden library of philosophy and feminist books, which just blew her mind open to new ideas. And crucially, she saw strong, activist women in her own family, which proved to her that these ideas weren't just in books. Another way of life was actually possible.
Can you imagine the frustration? For every question she asked, why can't I stay out late? Why can't I think about that job? The answer was always, always the same. Because you are a woman. She said that phrase felt incredibly violent, like some magic explanation that just shut down all debate and justified any inequality.
So you have years of these intellectual doubts and moral frustrations just building and building. But the final break, it wasn't some slow, gradual realization. It was a sudden, emotional snap.
So what was the final straw? Well, the foundation was already there, right? Years of questioning the logic and fairness of it all. Then came the trigger. She was reading a book that described women as impure, as dirty, because of menstruation. And the reaction? It was just visceral, a wave of pure, white-hot anger. The idea of being shamed by a divine system for something so natural, something so completely out of her control, That was the ultimate injustice.
And in that moment, at around 16 years old, it all just crystallized. This was a system she would not accept. Her anger wasn't some abstract theological debate. No, it was a deep, personal response to an attack on her fundamental dignity as a human being. So after she finished her studies in Morocco, Riham moved to France. And she expected to find this open society, right? A safe haven for the kind of critical debate that was impossible back home. But what she found instead was, well, a surprising and really frustrating paradox.
The reality in France was a total shock. She was hoping for a culture of fearless debate, where religion could be questioned just like any other idea. But instead, she found that critiquing Islam was a massive taboo. Any attempt was often immediately shut down with accusations of racism, and there was just no room for any real, nuanced discussion.
Riham actually has a name for this attitude: paternalism. It's this belief that Muslims are somehow too fragile to hear critiques of their own religion, that they have to be protected from challenging ideas as if they were kids. And she argues that this approach, no matter how good the intentions are, is actually really condescending and blocks any chance for true intellectual freedom. And so, Riham's very personal journey leaves all of us with a much bigger, much trickier question. What happens when a society's most cherished values, like freedom and tolerance, smack right into each other? In the effort to be tolerant of a faith, is it possible to become intolerant of the very freedom of expression that allows us to question and grow? Her story really forces us to think about that difficult balancing act between respecting believers and respecting the right to question belief itself.